This is the story of why the world is as it is. The story of fate and the gods and the genies. It was in this fashion that the tale was told to me, and so it is in the same fashion that I shall tell it to you now. In the time before the land of fate became known as the land of fate, the world was young, very different. The great beings whom we call the gods sailed their mighty ships over the endless sea as freely as our corsairs and merchants do today. The great tribes of genie kind made their tents in the endless desert even more widely than the nomads do now. The world belonged to the gods and the genies, but they knew not how to share it. They were as fire and water, battling without end. Mortals, and by mortals I mean men and women, children and elders, humans and other intelligent races, were caught in this violent clashing of powers. They did not hold sway in the land as they do today. Rather, the mortals were pathetic creatures, trapped between the warring gods and genies, confined to a narrow slither of coast between the desert and the ocean. The ocean storms of the furious gods shattered the mortals' boats, while the desert winds of the wrathful genies scattered and destroyed their herds. The mortals were miserable, but they knew no other life, and who were they to question their fortune? Then, one day, among the mortal tribes, there was born a girl of exceeding beauty. Her first smile was like the moon breaking free of clouds. Her first laugh was more melodious than the call of a songbird. All who saw this girl loved her deeply. When she grew older and became a maiden of marriageable age, so widespread was the word of her beauty that at last it fell upon the ears of the gods. At first, not even such news could capture the interest of the quarrelsome deities, but soon 3 great gods, who were perhaps wiser than the rest, spied this maiden from afar. These gods were old Kor, and brave Hajama, and adventurous Najam. Each was immediately mesmerized by the maiden's beauty, and each immediately decided that she must devote herself to him alone, become a follower or an acolyte, a companion or a consort, to become as much a prisoner to him as he had become a prisoner to her beauty. And so the 3 gods sailed their great boats to the docks of the city where the maiden dwelled. There each in turn demanded of the mortals that she be brought forth and given over to him as a bride is given to her husband. Old Kor said, "One of such beauty must be taught wisdom to use her traits. As the eldest and therefore wisest god, I am the most suitable match for the maiden. Give her to me, else your people will become old and blow away on the ocean breeze." Brave Hajama said, "One of such beauty must be protected from other jealous suitors. I am the most valiant of my brethren, and therefore the most suitable match for the maiden. Give her to me, or else your people will be conquered by others and scattered throughout the burning world." Adventurous Najam said, "One of such beauty must be cloaked in rich attire, laden with great treasures. As the most industrious of my brothers, I am best able to meet her needs, and therefore the most suitable match for the maiden. Give her to me, or else your people will become craven and never amount to anything." And so the gods began to quarrel among themselves very loudly, such that the sky became dark. Bolts of lightning crashed against the ground. Their quarrel captured the attention of the genie tribes of the desert. Now it is true that the cold elemental gods of the genies care nothing for mortal beauty, but the genies themselves, they know of the pleasures and senses of the flesh. They appreciate them as much as mortals do. They came to learn the cause of the gods' argument. Upon seeing the maiden, they too were smitten by her beauty. "Such radiance!" cried the great Caliph of the Jinn. "We must bring her great treasures to rival those of the gods. Then she will choose me as her consort." "Such sweetness!" cried the great Khan of the Tao. "We must steal her away from these others. She will choose me as her consort then." "Such light!" cried the most respected Sultan of the Ifrit. "We must gather the other genies in an army and drive the gods away, and then she will choose me as her consort." "Such magnificence!" cried the imperial Padishah of the Marids. "We must threaten these humans with all manner of plagues and disasters so they will turn her over to us. Then she will choose me as her consort." And with that, the genies began to quarrel among themselves like the gods. And then the skies fully opened and let fall the rain, and the ground erupted with great gouts of fire. The people of the city feared for their lives, but they were too frightened to give the maiden to any one god or any one genie, lest they offend all the others. The maiden herself, afraid for her people, fled from the city into the jungles of the south. She hoped that she would starve there. Such was her beauty that the animals brought her food. She hoped that some great beast would devour her, but such was her beauty that no creature would harm her. She hoped that she could find a cliff high enough from which to throw herself, but such was her beauty that the ground smoothed and softened itself beneath her, and so at last she fell to the ground and despaired. Now Fate, that heavenly force who was like a goddess yet not a goddess, was also in the jungle. She kept herself apart from the gods and the genies, and she knew nothing of their petty arguments. Fate came upon the melancholy maiden, and like her powerful brethren, Fate was smitten with the maiden's beauty. She too desired the maiden's devotion, wished to capture the maiden's heart and win her companionship, but unlike her brethren, Fate did not want to possess the maiden as a trophy, nor did Fate entertain even a glimmer of lascivious thought. And Fate said to herself, "It is the willing hand which best crafts, and the willing heart which is most easily led. Perhaps if I discern her problem and aid her, she will find me worthy of her devotion." And so it was that Fate asked the maiden about the cause of her sorrows, and the maiden told Fate of her troubles in the same manner that I have described them. Fate became angry, for the gods and genies had behaved horridly. Fate wished to teach them a lesson. She hatched a plan and told it to the maiden, and the maiden smiled a smile like the moon breaking through the clouds, and agreed. They set to work, changing the maiden's features through skill and craft. Fate wove the maiden's hair with hanging moss, making it appear grey and stringy, and then she gave her a long beard of the same material. Fate rubbed mud across the maiden's face. The mud cracked upon drying, making her appear haggard and old, and then Fate cloaked the maiden's womanly form in voluminous robes, which were constructed to make her appear mannish and hunched. Thus the maiden, now disguised as an old man, returned to the city. Fate lingered behind her several steps away, becoming one with the shadows. The gods and genies were still arguing in the central court. The buildings quaked, the ground shook, the heavens roared. The people of the city were sorely afraid. Some had even fled by this time, travelling as far as they could. It was from these craven people that the barbarians of the north and the east arose, for this is the heart of the world. The brave people who stayed, trusting in Fate, who is all-knowing, became our native peoples. But that is another story. The old man, who was neither old nor a man, strode up to the combatants in the city square. The stooped and ugly figure then tapped a stout staff against the shoulder of the largest god, Hajama. "Why are you arguing so?" rasped the old man. "Ah, respected elder," replied the god, who was amazed by the old man's audacity and assumed him to be wise and powerful. "I have the right to take the beautiful maiden as my own, which these others deny me. That is why we argue." "No," said the great Caliph of the Jinn. "I have the right to take the beautiful maiden as my own, which the others deny me. That is why we argue." And so began the squabble again, until the old man, who was really the maiden, struck the ground thrice with his staff. Fate, of course, was with the maiden, and the force of the blow knocked all the gods and the genies from their feet. "I am old and wise," said the old man. "I have no need for young maidens. Show this girl to me, and I will decide who among you is the best match." And the gods and genies agreed, though each of them made great threats as to what would happen to the mortals if he alone was not chosen. Then the gods and genies set out to look for the maiden, as the old man had asked, and found she had gone from the city. "How can I decide who is to have her when she is not to be had?" said the old man. And the gods and genies ran about the city, looking in every apartment, every court, every quarter, seeking some trace of the maiden. They found nothing, for fate was with the maiden, and none could penetrate her disguise. Then the gods and genies ran 3 times around the world, scouring the mountain highlands and the ocean depths to discover the object of their desires, but they found no trace, for fate was with the maiden, and none could penetrate her disguise. Finally, the gods and genies returned to the courtyard of the city, where a great lamentation went up, for they had failed to discover the maiden. They cried and rent their garments, they cast themselves upon the ground in despair, and then the old man spoke. "I will do you a service," he said. "I will wait here until the maiden returns, for she is a shy and timid creature, and will certainly reappear soon after you leave. Then I will make a decision, and all will abide with it. Until that time you must move your homes far from the city and the lands of the mortal people, so that she might be impressed with your kindness and understanding." The gods grumbled, the genies whined, but in the end they all agreed with the old man. For until the maiden reappeared, there was no point in remaining among the mortals, who seemed quite ugly and tedious compared to the maiden. So they prepared to leave, the gods boarding their ships to return to the sea, and the genies mounting their great camels to return to the desert. Before the gods left, however, Kor the Wise turned to the old man and said, "We will go, but first we will choose among your people those who are worthy to act in our stead, those who can show that we are worthy of the maiden." And the old man replied, "We have no fate but the fate which is given to us." And he shrugged his shoulders. Each god then picked 10 men and 10 women to be his first servants, and so it was that the first cleric of the faith came into being. And then the gods mounted their great ships and sailed far away from the lands of the mortals. Before the genies left, the great Caliph of the Jinn said, "We will go, but only far enough away to avoid offending the maiden's people. We will send our servants and warriors to aid you to show that we are worthy of the maiden." And the old man replied, "We have no fate but the fate which is given to us." And he shrugged his shoulders. And so the genies rode into the desert on their great white camels, but to this day they come regularly to the mortals' land as servants and warriors. At last only the old man remained in the court. Fate stepped aside from the shadows and removed the false face and hair from the maiden, who said, "Surely the gods and genies will be angry once they realize they have been deceived. Will they not return to punish us with their righteous wrath?" "You have wisdom in true proportion to your beauty," replied Fate. "Yet for them to return and attack, they must first admit that they were deceived by a mortal, and no god would wish to appear so foolish in front of the genies, and no genie would wish to appear so foolish in front of the gods. Before you is a most difficult task, for should you choose genie or mortal or god, the others will know, and they will return to make good their great threats and dire warnings. You must never make that choice." "We have no fate but the fate which is given us," said the maiden, and she nodded. Fate remained with the maiden for some time. The maiden gained much in wisdom, learning how to deal with the gods and the genies and how to guide mortals to the correct path, the path to which they are destined. Even after Fate left the maiden's side, Fate remained with her. With Fate's guidance, as the maiden, she inspired great crafts and beautiful art and mighty spells. In the guise of the old man, she inspired careful thought and hard work and learning. Still, her words and her acts touched only a few of the many mortals in Zakhara. Fate instructed the maiden to record the wisdom she had gained. And this she did. And so it was that one day, long thereafter, the boy who would be the first Caliph discovered the maiden's scrolls and spread the word of the Loregiver throughout the land, which became known as the Land of Fate. If the gods and the genies have ever found out Fate's trick, They have said nothing, and no mortal has inquired, for only a fool would broach the subject and risk their wrath. The maiden, who came to be called the Beautiful One, the Old One, and the Lawgiver, has yet to make her decision. Even to this day she remains at the side of fate. She has been greatly tested by mortals, gods, and genies, but that is another set of tales, and one for another evening.